So I'm going to look at the population here. Let's see what happens. Good afternoon from New York City at the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. My name is Tanya Domi, and I am a professor in the Harriman Institute's Balkan Studies program. Today, we gather together amongst some of the top Balkan analysts to discuss current events in the region that, quite frankly, rival the turmoil of the 1990s when Yugoslavia began its descent. The Harriman Institute at Columbia University is one of the world's leading academic institutions for the study of Russia, Eurasia, and East Central Europe. Our mission is to serve our community at the university and beyond by supporting research, instruction, and dialogue, sponsoring vibrant and multidisciplinary events that bring together our extraordinary resources of faculty, students, and alumni. We are committed to training the next generation of regional specialists to play leadership roles in setting the academic and scholarly agenda, making policy and challenging accepted truths about how we study our rapidly changing world. In particular, today, we will discuss the crisis in Bosnia-Herzegovina, originally initiated, I believe, under the auspices of U.S. foreign policy, in a letter sent by the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to the Council of Presidents in March 2021, calling for electoral reform. This electoral reform has been pursued at the behest of the HDZ, the Croat right-wing party in Bosnia. This culminated, actually, when the High Representative Christian Smit not only consulted with the Croatian government, but used bond powers to impose these reforms during the actual vote counting that took place in Bosnia's October 1st elections. A shocking display of hubris and illiberal is a kind description. Secondly, we will address the ongoing dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, a long-term crisis that has enabled a recent agreement on ID cards and license plates for border crossing that had erupted in military-like escalations by Belgrade in recent past years. We will also have an analysis of the outsized role of the Russian Federation in Serbia and throughout the region. We look forward to this analysis. And thirdly, the ongoing crisis in Montenegro, now operating with a technical government that has been undermined by the actions of the Prime Minister, Dragan Bearovic, who, against the advice of members of his party in parliament, cut a backdoor deal with the Serbian Orthodox Church, resulting in the collapse of the government. Belgrade and the Russian Federation have targeted Montenegro, a member of NATO, in a series of corrosive actions. In the past few months, crisis erupted in Belgrade when President Alexander Vučić canceled European Pride, or attempted to, hosted by Belgrade Pride, although Vučić's government supported Belgrade Pride's bid to host. We are grateful to Goran Miletić, who's joining us today to give us the backstory and forecast emanating from these troubling human rights events in the region. And last but not least, Kosovo 2.0 senior editor Orlan Kadru will discuss recent sexual gender-based violence that occurred in Kosovo, creating a backlash characterized by massive demonstrations led by women in Pristina and more recently in Sarajevo. So let's get to these discussions. And I want to start with Ralph Bearovic. Ralph is the vice president of of the European Alliance in Washington, D.C., and a fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Over to you, Ralph.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I'd like to say hi to all the guests and the participants, many notable people who shared the stage with me here. I'm going to be focused on Bosnia, and Bosnia is in a deep, deep crisis that is actually not made in Bosnia. This is a crisis that was engineered and implemented from Zagreb, Washington, and London. And if, when we spoke last year, we had some hope that the Biden administration was going to change course. We had very interesting, rumors and backroom sort of deals that were announced, but were not implemented last year, this time when we spoke. But since October 1st and 2nd, we now know that the Biden administration has decided to completely shift U.S. policy on Bosnia, almost 180 degrees, one can say. Besides the disappointment that most Balkan observers feel because of the Biden administration's support for what Christian Schmidt, the high rep, did after the polls closed on election night several Sundays ago, there are, I think, implications that have not been talked about yet, and I'm going to try to focus on, which is that I believe that the group of people who are in charge of the Balkans policy at the State Department in the last year or two have damaged U.S. credibility in Bosnia. I'm not going to say beyond repair, but we're talking about the biggest crisis of U.S. credibility in Bosnia since 1992. Same goes for London, because the British government unwisely decided to support the imposition of the deeply discriminatory election law. So we now find ourselves in a new environment in which I think the credibility of the OHR as an institution is severely damaged, and I think that the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina will likely strike down the imposition, Christian Smith's imposition. I think that we're going to find ourselves in a few months' time, in about two months' time, in a position where the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina decides against what Christian Schmidt did, and you're going to have a whole new environment in which rules are going to be very difficult to implement, Dayton rules, simply because those who upheld it for 25 plus years have severely damaged themselves, in an inexplicable act of self-harm. I mean, of course, they've harmed Bosnia, in my view, as well. But what's happened is that I think that people who were in charge of U.S. foreign policy thought that it was a great idea to go back in time and to behave as if the countries in 1993, 1994, and apply the lessons learned at that time, at the time when they were negotiating the formation of the so-called Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, to today, to 30 years later. And as the main architect of the U.S. policy, the U.S. Federation policy in 1993, one Daniel Server said last night, actually, he lambasted the U.S. decision to go along with Schmidt, but he also said that it is incredible that the U.S. supports Zagreb's and HDZ, Bosnian and Croat parties' claims that they're disenfranchised, despite the fact that they make up about 15-17% of the population, and they have tremendous influence over government. Now, after this decision, any decision in Bosnia basically cannot be made without the consent of the two HDZs, which is just completely surreal. I mean, Bosnia is now in a position that I think South Africa was during apartheid. You have a numerical minority that now is in charge of the majority of the population, whose voice does not really matter because some, German German politician from Bavaria decided to change the region's, basically country's constitution, which is, when you say it, it sounds completely surreal, I must say. I must admit that I did not believe that the Biden folks were going to go and do this. I mean, considering my association with the campaign and, the fact that a lot of us, even on this, panel, were in contact with the people in the administration. I thought that that cooler heads in the White House would prevail, if not at the State Department. But what we're seeing now, I think, is they're simply unwilling to accept the consequences of what they did. They're going to try to move on, quote unquote, which is not going to happen. I mean, moving on is not happening. So I'm now in a very sort of a difficult position of handing it over to Kurt in this moment in time. Yeah, go, Kurt.
Okay, I'm going to ask Kurt Bassinger to weigh in here. He's a founder and a senior associate at the Democratization Policy Council. Kurt's been working on Bosnia for a very, very long time. We're really lucky to have him. Kurt, you've got the microphone.
Okay, I'll keep within the short burst time frame that we've got. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to see everyone. I fear what the American policy, and this is an American-led policy right now, is predicated on, is really just a regional approach, honestly, of pacification. Our highest ambition is for the Balkans not to be a problem. And so what this does is essentially, as going back to the factory settings of the Washington Agreement in the Federation, as Raif said, it's basically optimizing what's already an oligarchical system for one of the oligarchical beneficiaries for managerial simplicity. And what this also implies, and what's coming next, is the next beneficiary of this will probably be Milorad Dodik when we talk about state property. Now, to be clear, there are beneficiaries across the board in this. It's not, there are Bosniak beneficiaries of this system too. And in fact, if you're talking in a dollar for dollar amount, the SDA has a bigger catchment area than anybody else. So I don't want to let anybody off the hook. The problem I think this presages is, one, the United States, along with pretty much everybody else, seems to have given up on the idea of integration in Bosnia, and even defending the state building that we've allowed to rust and rot, hollowed out since 2006, and seems to, not just for Bosnia, but for the entire region, the concept that the Balkans are inherently tribal, and all you can do is cut deals with potential warlords to keep it pacified. And what this also implies is, regarding Bosnia, is bowing to the idea that the country is a condominium of Serbia and Croatia, and it can only survive on their sufferance. So all of this is very negative. What's perverse in this is that what's masked by these actions is the fact that the entire political elite has never been as discredited at the popular level in Bosnia-Herzegovina as it is now. I've joked about this before, but it's not really a joke. If you had a referendum asking people in this country, would you like to send the entire political class to Goliotov? As long as it's yours, mine, theirs, it would win across the board. That wouldn't solve the problem, because you need to know what you want to replace it with. But this is a fatalistic managerial approach toward the entire region. And who are the beneficiaries? Not only the local leaders, but the Russians affected. You know you have a problem when the Russian ambassador applauds a move by a high representative that he's refused to recognize. That might be an indicator you've got a problem. So I think what this demonstrates is a complete hollowness in thinking toward the entire region, because Bosnia is the epicenter. It's the biggest prize for irredentism. It's the biggest prize for Srpski Svet. It's the only foreign policy issue for Croatia. And to be honest, there's been no creative thinking on what many people like to claim they're pursuing of a civic state. There's been no creative thinking on what that would be and what they're trying. You know, I think there's potentially grounds for that if you define what you mean and you make sure that you demonstrate to everybody in the country that that includes them. So I'm a very infuriated optimist about the potential of this country, or I would not have come back. But what this seems to indicate to me is that there is no impetus in Washington, in London, in Brussels, in Berlin. Unfortunately, though Berlin was not the driver of this, despite Schmidt being German, for anything really new. It's just damage control. And what this indicates, and I'll wrap up here so we have time for discussion, is on the current glide path, Bosnia will get there first, but the rest of the region will arrive there eventually, is that you end up with retirement communities, depopulated countries, run by, in Bosnia and North Macedonia's case, oligarchs, potentially everywhere else by autocrats just because of the political system, with the European Union throwing money over the wall, saying, you keep those migrants over there. And I wouldn't say that's a strategy, but that is a default setting. And that is an incredibly bleak picture of what our policies are achieving, despite the West having greater leverage in the Western Balkans, I'd say particularly in Bosnia and Herzegovina, than anywhere else on earth if we actually had a strategy. So, but we're building our strategy around the local beneficiaries of the political systems, which is an enormous white flag. And it's a kick me sign. So I'll hand off now. Thank you very much.
Well, that's really sobering. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dario Cepo, who's a professor at the law faculty in Zagreb, a friend of Harriman. This is your first time at the Roundtable. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing your remarks about Zagreb and the role of Croatia in this Bosnia mess, and opine, about what's going on in the government right now in Zagreb as well. Over to you, Dario.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I look forward to the conversation. And as Rauf and Kurt already mentioned, the role of Zagreb and the role of Croatian government in this current situation. Of course, I need to, and I was invited in order to talk about this Zagreb's position, and if anything has changed, or is it more of the same from this Zagreb's neo-colonial project of exerting its foreign policy influence over a neighbor. So I would say that considering Zagreb's position, or Croatia's position towards B&H, it is a combination of something new and something old. I'm not sure if there is something, there's also something borrowed regarding the ideas of what to do. I don't know if there is anything blue, but there are some combination of external and internal influences that lead Zagreb's or government's policy towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. The first one is I would say, continuation of Croatia's HDZ, so Croatian Democratic Union. HDZ's politics or policy of being a proxy for Bosnia and Herzegovina's HDZ, their sister party in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in external relations, especially relations with the EU. So parroting their policy ideas and parroting their political points of view to venues and to organizations where Croatia has much more of an influence than Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina would have without them. And it's also a combination of, it's also based on EU's more or less happiness to leave this topic to an expert in the field, meaning thinking that Croatia is closest to the turbulent neighborhood. So let's export this specialized topic to those who know the best about it, and this is of course in their view Croatian government and the High Representative. So this, then I wouldn't say collusion, but this cooperation between Zagreb's government and the High Representative in coming to almost similar or identical positions towards how to resolve the current issue is a result of EU being more than happy to get one thing off of their plate and put it to somebody else's. But there is also, this is an external element. Internal element is mostly linked to an opportunity one of the political actors in Croatia, namely President of the Republic, saw in further building a conflict with government, and mainly with Andrej Plenković, the Prime Minister and the leader of the HDZ. So he saw that by pushing Plenković to be more radical than he was comfortable with, he would do two things. He would show how unstable the support of Croatia's HDZ is towards Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and how most of the time, or some of the time, Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina are used by Zagreb more than they are helped by Zagreb. But it will also show in Brussels that Plenković can't really be a stabilization factor in the region, because his HDZ is no different than the HDZ of the 1990s and the Tudjman times. And also, of course, this would bring everything to a much more beneficial position towards Milanović, the president of the Republic himself, because in a couple of years' time there is going to be a re-election campaign. Of course, HDZ will have a counter candidate, and any number of votes that Milanović can chip away from HDZ's candidate in these future elections that will come or that might come from Croats who are interested in resolving the issue of Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is a win for Milanović. So Milanović is using this topic opportunistically for his own gains, but he is also changing this narrative that it is only HDZ that is taking care of Croats abroad. By pushing the narrative that Croats of course need saving, right, or needs protection, and I can also be a part of it. So you all of a sudden have a confluence of different elements: EU trying not to be too much involved, or letting Croatia be a voice of the European Union externally, and internally this conflict between, or the cohabitation, the hard cohabitation between the president and the prime minister, which somehow both of these elements broke on the backs of Bosnia and Herzegovina as an easy target for all parties included. I'll stop here and then we can talk about it later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dario. We're going to move to Serbia, Kosovo. I'm going to call on Agon Maliki, who is a policy analyst and an activist from Kosovo with a track record of working on topics related to democratization, development, and ethnic reconciliation with skunker.org. And then Agon's going to be followed by Ivana Stradner, who's going to comment not just only on the Kosovo-Serbia situation, but more broadly on the role of Russia in Serbian politics and throughout the region. We're lucky to have both of you. Over to you, Agon.
Thanks, Tanya, and nice to see everyone. It's an interesting time to discuss this subject. For those who are following, Kosovo and Serbia are in a bit of a collision course on November 1st on this issue of license plates. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I'll just think this is happening against a very important backdrop, which is this so-called French-German proposal on how to solve the dispute. Obviously, in light of what's happening in Ukraine, there's a bit of more of a sense of urgency in the West to get the Kosovo-Serbia thing done. And this proposal, which was initially leaked in the media, has now been confirmed, and now has been confirmed by pretty much everyone that it exists. And it's been gotten the support not just of EU but also the US administration. Seemingly tries to propose an intermediary solution that does not like a full immediate recognition, but more of a de facto or implicit recognition, or that kind of aims to unlock Kosovo at the European level, while giving Serbia something. Apparently, Vučić has managed, even in this geopolitical context, to get the West to some sort of an appeasement position on the issue of recognition, formal recognition. But this would be, in a way, a bit of a de facto recognition, in that Serbia would agree to not prevent Kosovo from joining international organizations and get other bilateral recognitions. So in this sense, this is not a specific proposal. It's not the detailed proposal. It's just more like a framework of what the Western, especially the French and the Germans, are thinking is possible within the current environment. So, but more or less what this proposal foresees is for Kosovo to get recognition by the 5 non-recognizers within the EU, and 4 of them are also NATO members. Open a path to NATO membership, join the Council of Europe, for which it has already started procedures, get a more speedy decision on visa liberalization. And then for Serbia, I guess, because obviously the biggest problem here has always been that, EU accession is not feasible for Serbia now, not just because of Kosovo, but also because of, where the EU and how enlargement is going. So the incentives of the carrots are more of a financial nature, I guess, and more of a pushing forward this regional integration ideas, for which Serbia has obviously more of an interest. So the biggest questions on this now is that both sides have not really given clear statements on how they're positioned towards the proposal. There's a lot of questions for Kosovo. The tricky one is the Association of Serbian Municipalities. Obviously, what's clear is that this cannot be any, with no recognition from Serbia, no formal recognition. This can in no way be any strong entity or a third layer of governance. So this will have to be some sort of a soft. If it happens, it has to be some sort of a soft. Within the lines of the constitutional court decision of Kosovo. Some drafts have leaked already, but they are way out of reality in what's possible or passable, at least in Kosovo. And then there's a question of guarantees. How can this agreement guarantee that non-recognizers in Europe will recognize Kosovo? So who can get them on board? These are serious questions being put in Kosovo. So there's a lot of lack of clarity on how to position on this. And now we have the situation on the license plates, which I'll go back to. So while we're having this big game on the dialogue being played out, Kosovo's government has this strategy. Kurti and Osmani have this strategy of effectively trying to increase their leverage in the negotiating table and asserting more of a effective control over the territory, particularly over the north, where there is still a large degree of informality, and Kosovo Serbs, institutions and practices that are not fully integrated within the Kosovo system. So they're trying to push ahead with this agenda. They did it with the ID cards. Tensions had been increased. Barricades were lifted up in the summer in the north over this issue. Vučić eventually backed off and let that thing pass. So now Kosovo and Serbia, people can move with only their ID cards. Now this license plate issue is way more trickier, because to implement it, Serbs in the north, it's different when the IDs issue is more different, because Kosovo controls the border crossings. So, the policeman at the border can just let someone in or not. To implement the license plates, there are around 7,000 cars registered under Serbian license plate issued for Kosovar cities, so Mitrovica and these northern cities. To go and confiscate these cars, this will require the enforcement of police level at the north. So the US and the EU have come up and asked Kosovo to postpone the deadline for this for another 10 months. Kurti has seemingly not agreed, together with Osmani. They're saying this is a rule of law issue. And now Vučić and the leaders in the Serbs in the north are threatening to put up barricades again. Last time around, those barricades were put. Reports have suggested, and EULEX has confirmed, that there were considerable armed groups present there. So imagine a scenario of Serbian armed groups. These are mostly criminal groups tied to Milan Radojic and the crew that has been sanctioned by the US. And if they're there and if Kosovo police starts to take actions, this will be a tense moment on November 1st. So I just wanted to highlight that this is something that will needs to be followed. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agon. Now I'm going to give the microphone over to Ivana Stradner. We are so lucky to have her with us today. She serves as an advisor to the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. She's a highly regarded and well-known Russian cybersecurity disinformation specialist, and the role of Russia in not only Serbia, but throughout the region. I'm really delighted to welcome you back, Ivana. And we also look forward to your comments on the role of Russia in Montenegro as well. Over to you.
Good morning, Tanya. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel, and so wonderful to see all those faces that I already know, whether online or in person. So I would like to just continue discussion on the role of Russia, and I think it's perfect because both the commentary on Bosnia and Kosovo just really shows that we still do have a problem, a Russia problem in the region. So first of all, we have to admit Russia has been influencing the Balkans for a very long time, and Putin's efforts was basically to push the Balkans to the brink, which was the part of his mission to reestablish Russia as a global power broker. He wanted to use a similar strategy that he has been using already in Caucasus, like that basically to ramp up tensions and then to position himself in the region as the only mediator and security guarantor. The main goal, of course, was to undermine NATO and the European Union, and to show that the West is actually not a credible partner in the Balkans. But then with the war in Ukraine, Putin has been working very, very hard to create another chaos in the region, and with his influence campaigns, and to basically put more attention to the Balkans instead of Ukraine. I was very concerned back in February, and everyone who has been following my work, I've been warning about this particular thing, because Russia does not need to roll on tanks in the Balkans. It's really enough already to use existing tensions and to polarization for further tensions and to create chaos, something that we already have been observing in Kosovo, but also in Montenegro, but also in Bosnia. Usually I have this gloom doom scenario for the Balkans, but this is one of a very few times that I'm a little bit more positive to provide a picture on the long run, given how Russia is poorly performing in Ukraine, that this is actually going to have also a huge influence on the region in the long run. So we have to also calculate that in our analysis on Russia. But before I do that, and I would like to maybe talk more about that later, let me just tell you like a big picture. What was Putin's strategy? Really to tip the balance of power in Europe to Moscow's advantage, and how he has been using that with a typical Moscow's strategy, using non-kinetic efforts such as information operations to inflame ethnic tensions. It's really just, one just needs to observe the role of the Orthodox Church, what has been happening also in Bosnia, but also in Kosovo recently. Encourage protests. Really, we just need to look at what has been happening since February and how many protests were over there in the region. Russia cemented numerous arms deals, especially with Serbia. Numerous countries in the regions are actually energy dependent on Russia. So Russia really does have a lot of influence in the region. I wanted to emphasize couple of things that happened over since February, especially with Serbia, which is the main Russian ally. So Serbia did not impose sanctions on Russia, but Serbia supported General Assembly resolutions. And that's not because Serbia firmly believes in the West, but rather because of the possible creation of the Kosovo precedent. Serbian media still mirrors very much Russian media. Protests were in place supporting Russia, where you can basically find more Z signs probably than in Moscow, although there were, a couple of pro-Ukrainian protests in Belgrade. Selakovic and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, they signed recently a so-called consultation plan for additional 2 years. And how does this actually benefit President Vučić? Well, chaos in the region really allows himself to frame himself as a force of stability. What I've just learned about Bosnia, it really just confirmed from my colleagues that Russia still has a huge influence in Bosnia, and this whole chaos is really just the best gift to the Kremlin. I'm happy to talk more about it later. And Kosovo is actually very interesting because both Serbia and Russia announced that Kosovo would attack Serbia before October the 1st. I've been monitoring the information space closely inside Russia, and it was fascinating really to see how they were portraying this conflict, even accusing the West of opening a new front line and challenging Russia in that front. I'm happy also, later maybe to talk about license plates and what the role of Russia, how they benefit from that. But I was very, very happy to see that NATO sent a very clear message during chaos that they are ready to intervene if the event, or in the event of further escalations. There were 2 US B-52s actually conducted like a low approach flyovers over North Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, and Croatia. And Vučić also understands that Serbia is surrounded by NATO members, so and it will be very, very costly for him to do any irrational moves over there. When the US government stated, for example, it's time to forget about the narrative that Kosovo is Serbia and start saying that Kosovo and Serbia are actually Europe, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova openly responded, no, never. And for the Kremlin, Kosovo is not about some romanticized Slavic brotherhood. So this really just the frozen conflict benefits Putin, and he even used Kosovo as a precedent for Crimea and the latest territory that he recognized. So I just want to conclude that if the West really cares about region, and if the West really is concerned about Russia's influence in Europe more broadly, I cannot think of a better time to counter Russian influence operations today, because this is a really right thing and a right time to do.
Thank you so much, Ivana. That was it's fascinating. It's always fascinating on Russia. Now we're going to go to Montenegro, and I'm delighted to welcome Alex Bearovic, who is a Montenegrin political scientist, columnist, and a civil activist. He's got a master's degree in political science, University of Montenegro, and he's actually now getting a second one at the University College Dublin and University of Warsaw. I met Alex this summer in Srebrenica because of the Post-Conflict Research Center and his participation, and I was really struck by his political acumen. And so I'm delighted to welcome you, Alex, to the Harriman Balkan Roundtable, and please weigh in, and I will look forward to Ivana making some follow-up comments.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Hello, everyone. So this is a really ideal moment to talk about elections and political problems in Montenegro. We had local elections 3 days ago on Sunday, and I may say that Montenegro is now officially under the administration of Russian and Serbian malignant influence. So DPS, that was ruling for 30 years, experienced a debacle in those elections, and they lost almost all cities which they ruled for last 30 years. including the capital Podgorica. So its fall was celebrated with the flags of Serbia, Russia, Serbian nationalistic songs, so the choreography that we see usually these days in Montenegro. And on the other hand, in Budva, which was always been place known for its pacifism, the Democratic Front, the main branch of Vucic's politics in Montenegro, achieved an absolute victory. They got 49% of total votes. So the biggest winner of those elections is the Europe Now movement, which through populist stories about the imminent increase of minimum wage to 1,000 euros per month, they managed to take advantage of the crisis that we have in the moment and to attract a large number of voters. So this movement is led by two ex-ministers of previous government, which was formed by Serbian Orthodox Church. So those two guys are chosen by SOC, and since they promise to form a new majority with the Democratic Front, we can conclude that they are under the same influence and that they serve the same agenda. So their candidate for the mayor of Podgorica, a day after that, went to the temple, to main temple in Podgorica, the place where ex-Metropolitan Amfilohije was buried like 1 year before, and that's the same guy who brought him to power, exactly. So on the other hand, Dritan Abazovic and his party are maybe the biggest losers of the election. They had a huge power, they had a place, the position of prime minister, they had the most important ministries, and that wasn't enough for them to succeed in the election. They received only around 6% in Podgorica, and usually they received less votes than 2 years ago in other places. And so Abazovic and his party is in a struggle now, also because they are accused for cigarette smuggling, and it's believed that their campaign, the whole campaign, was financed by this money. One of their top members was accused for cigarette smuggling. So unfortunately, it's obvious what we warned like all the time in the past 2 years that is coming true. So Serbian and pro-Russian parties are getting stronger, and it's possible that they will soon be able to form a government on their own without Dritan Abazovic. So I don't even need to say what are the consequences of that and what would be with Montenegro and the region if those parties were, if they accede to power openly. So on another hand, some officials of the Democratic Front have already speaking publicly at assembly sessions that they have majority to change constitution, mainly the parts that are related with national symbols and countries' foreign policy. So I think this can lead to catastrophic consequences, mainly for peace in Montenegro. So I'm afraid that we are now like officially back in 90s. So I think that we need to reform pro-Western political bloc as soon as possible, and that includes to retire old leaders, and we need new young people with clean biographies behind them to lead that bloc. So also we need enormous help from the West. You mentioned when you were back in Montenegro in 2020, in 2002 and 2003, I exactly mean like the same it was before. And then on the other hand, Abazovic allows Serbian Orthodox Church enormous privileges, and he helped them to openly dominate Montenegro. So since then, the SOC has been open player in every election process, and through the manipulation of religious feelings of its member, they provide the necessary majority to the political parties that currently suits them. So this is for now.
Okay, thank you so much, Alec. Ivana, what are your thoughts on Russia? Because they are definitely playing an outsized role in Montenegro.
If there is one particular country right now in the Balkans that I'm concerned about, that is right now Montenegro. And what Alec just mentioned, it really paints a perfect picture of how Russia has been influencing Montenegro for years, especially using the Orthodox Church. And if you, which has served for a very long time as a Kremlin's foreign meddling tool. So if you, for example, if you actually compare how the Serbian Orthodox Church functions in Montenegro, can really make a perfect connection with how Russia was in the past using a similar strategy also in Ukraine. Which really tells you that there is a very clear tie with that, especially when it comes to the creation of the Serbian Orthodox Church, with the Serbian world, et cetera. Why Montenegro? I mean, it's a NATO member state. Access also to Adriatic Sea is very important for Russia, but also having such a polarized country that exists right now in the Balkans, it's also the best gift for the Kremlin to trigger more conflicts. But one thing that I want to emphasize, and something we can actually even talk more about it later. So Montenegro, actually, they detained, certain Russians of suspicion of spying recently. They've been doing numerous efforts to counter such efforts. But let's not forget also that Montenegro's head of intelligence was actually recently fired in October in Montenegro. And the real question we have to ask is why? What are his policies towards Russia, and something that maybe the prime minister did not like. That's also something that I think we should definitely pay attention to. And the last thing that I would like to emphasize is that there was recently a cyber attack, also in Montenegro, a huge cyber attack. It's still questionable who is, behind this attack. But one thing that I'm going to make as a prediction is that this cyber attack is just, I think, one of many efforts that we'll see more and more in the region. As I mentioned, I cannot claim that Russia was behind this, but one thing that I can certainly claim is that influence operations are very high in Montenegro, and Russia does not need to roll on tanks in Montenegro to destabilize it, but rather already to use existing polarization, existing chaos to give a very hard time to the West, because in case of any problem, I mean, you are dealing actually with a NATO member state after all. So better sooner than later to take this threat seriously.
Thank you. That's really interesting, of course. Okay, I'm going to ask Goran Miletić to weigh in here. And I want to just say a few words about my friend Goran Miletić, a highly regarded human rights lawyer in Serbia, worked for the Humanitarian Law Center with Natasha Kondic. He's well known for his advocacy for ethnic minorities, including Roma rights. But he is also highly regarded as a pivotal force behind Belgrade Pride, beginning his activism in LGBT human rights in 1991 with Arcadia. I just want to say that I consider him to be very brave and the best of the best, and he honors us with his presence here. He is a driving force that precipitated the Belgrade Pride bid to European Pride, and the government of Serbia backed that bid. And then President Vučić attempted to cancel it. And that's why we're here to hear what Goran has to say about the consequences of those actions by the Serbian government. What does it mean for Serbia, LGBT, and human rights more broadly in the Balkans? Over to you, Goran, and welcome to the Harriman Institute.
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad that I'm here. First, maybe to refer to something that Aga mentioned related to Kosovo about membership in Council of Europe. So at the table, we have that at the moment. as Angan mentioned, and Kosovo apply, and Kosovo definitely became a member of Council of Europe. That's without doubt at the moment. And in Strasbourg, everything is ready. The only thing that is now not that clear how fast this will happen, but the whole process will happen. I mean, quite soon. So why I'm mentioning particularly Council of Europe is for some of you that maybe know, has a European Court on Human Rights and provide really practical protection of all citizens of one country. So if there is no protection of human rights, you can complain to European Court. And that now, with the membership in Council of Europe for all citizens in Kosovo, that possibility will be open. All of us in the Balkans, in other 5 Balkan countries, Western Balkan countries, have the possibilities, but not in Kosovo, despite the fact that Kosovo is implementing a European Convention. So for now, that possibility will be open. And Vučić today mentioned in a press conference that Kosovo will become a member without any. He said that it's a finished story, that this will happen for sure. And but he stopped there. He should say that, of course, okay, if it's priority of Serbia to protect Serbs in Kosovo, then he should say that membership is something positive for Serbia, actually, because there will be another possibility, international possibility, for any Serb that thinks that his human rights are violated in Kosovo, that he has another international protection. So, but he didn't mention that at all. He present the membership of Kosovo as something negative. So this is another illogical thing that is happening in Serbia. But apart from that, facts in Serbia are quite dead for a long period of time, and it doesn't matter what is really happening. And the key thing in the moment in Serbia is how Vučić will present the particular thing in media. So whatever is happening in the regional relations in the region or in Serbia, the most important is actually everyone awaiting his press conference and how he will present particular situation or some incident and so on. So it could be something very small, like some protest related to environment or anything like that, or in case that I was very much involved, and Tanya mentioned Europride. I mean, that was, everyone was waiting him to come to TV and say what he thinks about it. And since we don't have much time, I will say a couple of words about that case, about Europride. That was a big European manifestation, and once a year, every one of the cities in Europe is getting that opportunity to call Pride as a Europride. And we did it for the region. We did it 2018, and we got 2019 Europride for Belgrade as a kind of as opportunity for the entire region to have such an important event in the region. And I was thinking mostly that, you know, in these 3 years that the city hall here, city government and central government will see that as an opportunity, if nothing else, as a touristic opportunity to, you know, to present that many people will come, that Belgrade will be some kind of center or whatever, that they will recognize Europride as some kind of potential or as a promotion of Serbia. But no, of course, we have objective circumstances, pandemic, we have war in Ukraine, we have elections in Serbia. But no, everything collapsed. The whole idea was really the first obstructed by City Hall, by new mayor Šapić, who is really absolutely he's almost fascistic. He's not even nationalist. He's even going more. And after that, that was taken over by Vučić, who said twice in the press conference that Pride is banned. Between these two things, we had a lot of litias or I don't know, religious marches or similar, like we have it in Montenegro. But the problem this time was that there was 30,000 people. This is a huge number for Belgrade, and we had really a lot of questions if this was a Russian influence or not. And to be very honest, even today, when everything is over, we still don't have that answer if the Russian influence was in these marches during the streets of Belgrade or not. what we got from some experts believe that Russian money and Russian influence was really high, while others believe that this was only excuse for Vučić and a ruling party to do something negatively for the conservative part of society. So to be honest, after all negotiations with the government around Europride and all discussions and attempts to have some kind of deal or some kind of dialogue with them and a solution, I still don't have an answer why they need to ban Europride and what was the benefit for Vučić and for the ruling party when they ban Europride, such a big manifestation. At the end of the story, they must allow march. It doesn't matter how long and so on, but they allow the march and everything because the pressure was high and there was a lot of international guests here. But what was the benefit they have from the ban? No one really knows. So at the end, this is the moment in Serbia where we don't have minimum human rights anymore. We don't have minimum standards respected. We don't have facts that are enough per se and explained by journalists. We always wait for Vučić to explain facts by his side. And at the end of the story, we don't have any explanations anymore for some things, some violations of human rights that are happening, like in case of Europride. So there was no clear explanation why this is happening. So this is the situation around Europride, and that was situation at the moment. But I can speak more later when we have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Goran. And I'll just tell the audience that Ivana Stradner and I wrote a piece on actually the attempted cancellation, and I will be happy to share it. It's at Just Security, and Ivana does a wonderful job at deconstructing Vučić's actions and what's behind his decision-making. It wasn't just exclusively about the cancellation. And I actually believe, Goran, that Russia was involved. It's just no coincidence that they would do nothing more, would love to do nothing more than cancel Pride, European Pride. That extension, I think, it's pretty obvious in a lot of ways, given their position on LGBTQ human rights. So, Orlan, not least, but even though you are last, but certainly not the least among us, I think I just want to say to you and to people who are watching this program that I was in Kosovo last weekend, and I was deeply impressed by the Office of the President and her staff and the women that were really organizing and participating in this forum on women, peace, and security. I actually have more optimism after being in Kosovo than before I was. I really believe that it's one of the most dynamic countries, and I think it's attributed to the youth, and so many are so well educated. Their credentials are quite impressive in the government, competence I saw, and even though these terrible events certainly took place recently. Over to you. Kosovo 2.0 is a terrific journalism platform, and this platform is always leaning forward, and you yourself as a senior editor at Kosovo 2.0 on this topic, we turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. So I'll just dive right in, really. I guess most of us have heard about the most recent case that you, Tanya, also mentioned previously. So by the end of August, it was reported that 5 boys and men had raped an 11-year-old woman for 7 hours in a public park in Pristina. So this indeed invoked a massive collective reaction, and then that led to a protest on the same day. So shortly after the news broke about the rape case, activists, feminist collectives, and civil societies called for a nationwide protest in August, the 31st of August, 2022. On that day, the streets and squares of Pristina were really flooded with thousands of people expressing collective anger and calling on institutions to take actions. I have to highlight the fact that this was one of the biggest protests on the issue since Kosovo declared its independence. So this was on that positive note that you shared earlier. So the protest then continued with a sit-in protest in front of the building of the government, and then another protest was called on the 5th of September. The protesters demanded the dismissal of the officials responsible for the failure to protect the woman in this case, and also other women in general. And they demanded legal changes that would allow women to use pepper spray for self-defense. So as the issue received massive attention, the interest on the case increased. But what came after, which is also the main point of departure in what I'm going to say next, is that we found out that this very same girl had been raped 2 months before in June 2022 by 6 other men and boys, and nothing had been done until this case in August broke and became big and received the attention it did. Until then, like, no arrests were made or no public announcements whatsoever on the case. And what really makes matters worse is that the prosecutor for this case is the same prosecutor that was leading the case of an 11-year-old Ashkali boy that was raped and murdered a few years ago, and activists are still calling for justice for his case. So this boy was raped and killed, although the case had been previously reported in the court, and the prosecutor was already aware of the case. So we have a prosecutor that has failed to protect a citizen earlier and is still working as a prosecutor. So what we really see here is that far too many women and other marginalized groups are really being victimized due to institutional disregard. So in other words, violence against women is really not being called by its name. And this has led to multiple cases where women have experienced violence outside the institutions and then within the institutions themselves. So it's high time that we acknowledge that institutional disregard is really the key factor to this everywhere violence against women in Kosovo and sadly in the region, from what I've been able to follow. We learned that from the case above, that no case of rape and femicide really is simply an isolated happenstance. It is a system of power that is regularly and carefully maintained to serve men. And unfortunately, this institutional issue, this has become an institutional problem as much as a societal one. So I maintain that in this case, but also other cases, institutions have really failed. So I'm not as positive from what I've seen and from the pattern we have been witnessing with gender-based violence. They have failed because what we're seeing in the streets is a sort of a transfer of power, really. The rule of law has been, from being in the hands of democratic institutions, has somehow been handed to the perpetrators and the rapists. So I say this particularly having in mind that most of the boys and men who raped this 11-year-old girl were known to the institutions. And really, this really begs the question: why were they allowed to wander in the streets? Why were they enabled to rape this woman? Why I say this is a pattern is because just a year ago, an 18-year-old was raped and killed and just thrown like a rag in front of a hospital. And really, what the problem here is, the question here is what courts are doing afterwards, after the public is calling on them. They are really just becoming aggressive, defensive, and just reproducing the same patriarchal norms that we see when we see on men, and they're expecting women to be docile, and whenever women do not act that way, they're getting angry. So what I need to conclude, because I guess I have I've passed my time, but
Yes.
I just believe that right now women in Kosovo are fed up with superficial interventions that are lovely for the headlines, and that's the youthful spirit and the mobilization we're seeing now, and signs of solidarity have been expressed in Tirana, Skopje, and elsewhere.
Sarajevo too.
Sarajevo as well, and
Yeah.
Belgrade is also protesting
Mhm.
against gender-based violence and against placing rapists in the forefront of our discussion. So really what we see is that women want real change, and they're gonna do it with or without the approval of the government and the institutions. So I really, what I hope for is that the institutions might as well, join the fight.
Well, thank you so much. I do want to say to our audience and these panelists that in the spring, I'm going to host a conference on violence against women in the Balkans. Gender-based violence is pervasive. There's no country where it hasn't been touched. And I think your comments on the institutions are spot on. And it really calls for a broad transformation of not only the institutions, but the cultural attitudes that would bring Kosovo and all the other countries in step with the rest of what we call established democracy and accountability. And there's been broad demonstrations throughout the region, as you pointed out. So thank you very much. And I would also add that we will be doing a conference on LGBT human rights in the Balkans, because there's an intersection here between gender identity, and sexual orientation. With a rise of authoritarianism, the oppression is more than obvious. So let me just I want to open it up to our panelists. We have like 20 minutes. I think a couple of things that really stick out here is U.S. foreign policy, the role of the EU, and how are these crises that we've all talked about, who's going to push these forward, if anybody? Is any Western government really going to play a role here? And I want to, please, if you want to weigh in on this question, I'm throwing it out to everybody, but let's just do very quick answers. And I'd like, Kurt, you just raised your hand, please.
Sorry, I hope I didn't interfere with your methodology. Just very quickly, I mean, the overarching part of our problem that we didn't get to just very quickly is that we have not reviewed the West's approach toward this region since it was sort of set with the idea that enlargement's going to fix everything. That's evidently not worked. I'm not saying it's not a worthy goal. That's not what I'm saying, but obviously that in and of itself has not been sufficient to assist those who do want organic progress in these societies. But nobody wants to admit that. So again, in Bosnia's case, the latest iteration is, recommending candidacy status, which is, we've seen this movie before. You declare progress and you hope that reality catches up to it, but in effect, you're saying you're going to reward lack of progress. So there really is a need for a transatlantic policy review of why we're here and what we could do about it. But nobody wants to really do that. There's not high enough policy attention. So the gap between what our talking points are via the Ukraine, where we're finally talking about human dignity, democracy, and so forth, out of this transactional gear where we've been for a very long time on both sides of the Atlantic, and what our policies actually are in the Balkans, where we have a lot of leverage, has never been wider. The policy glide path for the West has not fundamentally changed since February 24th.
I also want to point out that that these crises, how Washington has responded or not, and now you have a London government, a new one, the third one, and many of us felt like their Balkan approach was probably better than anybody else's, but now this situation in London is really hampered, and I do not believe you're going to see this new prime minister pay attention to the Balkans. We'll see, but he's got a lot of things on his plate, and who knows if he'll be there in 6 months. I just want to make that comment, that observation. And but I want to ask Ivana. Ivana, Russia is playing big here. What do you think is going on? In Western capitals, it's like nobody wants to talk about it. It's like the obvious elephant in the room, but nobody's addressing it like as much as it would seem would be important to do right now. What are your thoughts?
I think Russia is certainly going to continue to influence how countries behave in the West, especially when it comes to the United States and London, but also France and Germany. It's needless to say how Germany has been behaving towards this war, and France alone, fearing even to humiliate Putin, what Macron stated. And it does really have a huge influence also in the region, because Putin understands very well that isolationism in certain capitals in Europe and fear is certainly going to influence the decision-making process. I'm actually also very concerned about 2023, the role of inflation next year, the role next year in energy sector and how that is going to impact the continuation of this war. Also US elections and how that is going to impact further this conflict. When it comes to the United Kingdom, we still have Ben Wallace as a defense minister, and London openly claimed that they will continue with a full support in Ukraine. And I have numerous reasons to believe that that's correct, and that the United States will also continue with its support. But really, the third thing is that I'm also worried about the rise of far-right movements in Europe. And how that is going to impact 2023. So we really need to think outside the box, not only about 2022, but more importantly, to make a strategy for Ukraine and the Balkans in 2023, and not to allow all those vulnerabilities that I just mentioned to impact the decision-making process from Washington or London.
Okay, thank you. Ralph, I want to ask you a question. No one, I was thinking about this the other night, that no one, when Dayton was signed, could have imagined a high representative inside Bosnia having bond powers that is actually aiding and abetting some of the worst nationalistic impulses, if not forces that actually cooperate with other proxies. What are your thoughts about this high representative, this situation, and what can be done to pressure him to actually shift off of this trajectory? It seems very, very, it just seems just really undercutting Bosnia in a really serious way.
Yeah, so this is the first time the High Rep has imposed a law, and he even changed the constitution along with the law, that does not have support of the majority of the population. So this is the first time in 25 years that the High Rep has made a decision which, if it were put to a referendum in the country, would most certainly fail. So my estimate is that over 70% of the country is against this decision. When, as you said, when the High Representative's office was set up and consequently given the bond powers in the 97, nobody ever thought that those bond powers would be used to further divide the state. Right. And Kurt has rightfully said that this indicates a change in Western posture in Bosnia, which he attributes to desperation and disinterest. I hope that he's right, because if that's the case, then we can, there's a hope for reversal. But my feeling is actually that This is part of a larger strategy of appeasing Serbia and Croatia in the region. I think that this is about giving Bosnia up or handing it over to Belgrade and Zagreb as a reward for nice behavior, so to say. So I suppose that we'll see what Schmidt, how he reacts to the decision of the Constitutional Court. My feeling is, and my information, the things that I'm hearing from people is that Constitutional Court is going to have an exceptionally hard time not striking this down. So it is more likely that this decision will be struck down by the Constitutional Court than not. If that happens, then I think will provide the West with the opportunity to change course again and, you know, go back to being at least disinterested, if not, you know, doing the right thing. When it comes to Schmidt, I've written about it, you know, even before he was appointed, you know, and I don't even know how many pieces, how many TV appearances and so on. I think my feeling from meetings, off the record meetings with him in Washington, online, of course, was that I don't think he's fit for the role. I don't think he's aware of the consequences of what he did. So his intervention it's a de facto implementation of the wet dream of the far right in Croatia. That's what this is, because you're not going to have any way to form a new ruling coalition in Bosnia, new government, without the HDZs exactly saying who's going to be in it. So once Schmidt sees how this works out, if the Constitutional Court doesn't strike it down, he might realize how badly he mismanaged the whole situation. But I'm not holding my breath. I think he's now doubled down on his approach because there's so much criticism, so much insults. I mean, he's getting insulted on a daily basis by thousands of people, the media, the analysts, the political leaders. The West is not really behind him. I mean, I know that the embassy, US and UK embassies have sort of supported him. Escobar sort of said, yeah, he's right. But you don't see, there's no concerted campaign to protect him from criticism that he deserves. So I would not be surprised if they back down after the Constitutional Court strikes this down, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. Daria, what do you think about HDZ? I mean, is it more of the same? They're just going to continue doing what they always do and act as a proxy for the EU. Now they have an EU platform, and they legitimize their policies by advancing them on EU platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there will be more of the same. There is no reason for turn to a different path, especially now that due to EU's reluctance or due to EU's reshifting the focus, they are more or less getting or getting close to getting what they always wanted, which is, if not the jure third entity, then it is a complete dominance of their sister party HDZ of Bosnia and Herzegovina over, of course, mostly revenues. This is what they're interested in, and okay. by doing that, this is the only way to go there.
Thanks, Agon. I heard a lot of scuttlebutt about how the U.S. doesn't really like Kurti. He's a tough guy, and he's not going to be pushed around. And I think his bottom line is recognition. And, the EU doesn't necessarily like him either. What are your thoughts about, the way he presents himself and the way he negotiates, and where does that go? Where do you think that goes?
He has successfully achieved one thing in that he's created this sort of ambiguity about what he'll do. And that's, for negotiation purposes, that's good enough. But I think he's reached a dead end in the sense that some decisions have to be taken, in that, he'll have to decide whether he's an activist or a politician. And because politicians ultimately have to also make some tough choices. The recognition is obviously a good talking point. Mutual recognition will always be a Kosovar talking point. But I think the thing to worry about more is, the that, the mutual recognition at this point might even raise the stakes of what Kosovo has to concede. So what this proposed solution offers, at least for Kosovo, is that, for Kurti, an even more challenging problem will be the ASM, the Association of Serbian Municipalities, on which he has built his narrative over the past decade. He was staunchly against it. He went to prison for it. He threw tear gas in parliament. So if that one turns out to be just a little nothing in the sense of its powers, then there's maybe something to work with. But it's crunch time now, and the Western diplomats are really serious about a couple of months deadline for, or maybe next year being decisive on this. I'm not so sure. No, but as I said, he's being very ambiguous on where he will take things. How much he can do, when actually in the north, KFOR is the ultimate, and NATO is the ultimate security. You cannot. There's only a limited amount of what he can do with police threats and with the sort of imposing the security situation in the north. So it's more of a wait and see. But I do think that it's going to be a very volatile year, because the status quo will not hold. I don't think we will see a continuation of this kind of dialogue. We will either see the whole Brussels dialogue unravel entirely, or we will see some sort of political process that leads to an agreement. I just don't see any in between, because this kind of situation where both sides are testing one another, trying to push another to make a mistake, is going to lead to some sort of disaster.
Thank you. Alec, I've been reading about Montenegro, that perhaps DPS emerges here, and there's a reconsolidation around them possibly getting out of this quagmire. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's not going to happen. I think that DPS is now in really big problems, and what I think is the solution, I think that we need to have one new party that is going to be formed by current pro-Western parties. We need new people, and of course we need a huge support, as I mentioned before, as it was in end of the 90s, 2000, 2001, when we were in fight with Milosevic. So Montenegrin voice needs to be heard in DC. That's also with Bosniaks. Currently that's not the situation, so we need to work more on our lobbying network, and we need allies. And when I say that, I think about United States, because really I do not believe in European countries, because that's their direct fault. The current situation in Montenegro, that's their direct fault. So they were cooperating with Serb Orthodox Church and with some other parties, and now they see what they did, but I think that they can't help anymore.
Okay, thanks. And I want to end with human rights. I am a human rights professor. Goran, what's your forecast? I'm going to come to you too, Owalan. Goran, you laid out what the minimal is happening now in Serbia, but more broadly in the region, what are your thoughts, particularly this effort to cancel Euro Pride? What are your thoughts about how that could affect the region with regard to LGBT human rights? Every country's got a pride now, and that's a big shift. But where are we there? And then Owalan, with you, with respect to gender rights, what do you think the next step should be? I mean, should it go beyond Kosovo into the EU Court of Human Rights? Goran.
The first thing that is very important for the entire region is the transitional justice, so dealing with the past. I think we missed that opportunity to do something, maybe not big, maybe it was too optimistic to believe that something big will happen, but to do at least something, at least some minimum in all countries. And I think it's not done enough. I mean, after, let's say the last war we have, like in Kosovo, I mean, it was 99 to 23 years ago, and many victims and many witnesses are not alive anymore. And, time is passing, and there are completely new generation. I'm working with them. I mean, completely new generations who are not confused, who are triple confused than it was some previous generations when you are telling them about siege of Sarajevo or about what's happening in Kosovo or in Croatia or so on. So it's really, we must miss that opportunity, and that's the most important. The second thing is we are still talking, we are still in our circles talking about reports, about establishing facts, which is very important, but we need to communicate much better. And I think at the moment, I mean, communication, especially in the region, is very emotional. You know, people can talk about one case and about entire reports of 50 pages and so on. People are simply not reading anymore. And we need to know that some things have changed, and we cannot go back to the previous period. And anti-human rights circles, I will tell, nationalistic, fascistic, or anti-rights or whatever, are much more stronger even than in Europe. In Europe, they are strong, or in the world, in the whole world. But I think in the Balkans, they are much more stronger, and we still don't have a good response on that. So we need to find a way. That's the moment. We need to find a way to challenge the narrative. I mentioned Europe as an example. That was my personal small example when I was going against the narrative that, you know, it's a conspiracy that came from, I don't know, West and many more. So I'm not a big optimist for other, for example, for dealing with the past, not optimist for example, fair trial standards in the region, rule of law. Maybe I'm optimist for LGBT rights. I mean, I think that things will get better when it comes to LGBT. But for the rest of human rights, I'm not too big optimist for that.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Alan, you're going to get the last word.
Good. So I join Goran. I mean, my hopes are high on solidarity in this region. So I think that's, we've seen signs and hopeful signs of that. And I think that's the next step. Of course, regarding gender, I ultimately think institutions need to examine themselves and scrutinize themselves deeply and be open. We've seen a vetting that has been initiated on the system of justice. I'm not very positive that will be the addressing the structural patterns of patriarchy and gender-based violence within the institutions, but I just insist on structural changes. Check our education system, include sexual education within the school's curricula. Check why women are not inheriting property. See why women are not able to go to shelters and receive the necessary care. See why men are embracing rigid masculinity. So I know these are tough changes, but I believe once institutions are open and not antagonizing grassroots collectives and groups working on the field, I think that's where the avenue is and where the hope is. So yeah, that's my
Thank you very much. Give my best to Besa Lucic, the editor-in-chief of Kosovo 2.0, a really great platform. I want to thank all of our participants today. I know we didn't have a lot of time to talk a lot about any one thing, but we've touched on, I think, you know, what is really happening, and I appreciate your time and your commitment. And it's always great to see all my friends in these boxes, and I hope to see you soon in person. Thank you guys very much. Have a great day. Thanks again.
Thank you. All the best.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.